I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
King Charles had endured public scandal, family fractures, and the crushing weight of inheriting a crown after 70 years of waiting. But nothing prepared him for the sound that emerged from a private royal recording kept sealed since Queen Elizabeth's final days. Her voice was calm, her message was deliberate. And when William's name was spoken, Charles reportedly stopped moving entirely, because what his mother had left behind was not merely a farewell, it was a final instruction. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat frozen as the recording continued, his hand tightening around the chair. The sealed audio had been preserved separately from ordinary family correspondence, so it was no ordinary keepsake. It had been held back for a moment, after the monarchy had entered its first difficult period under him. That timing suggested Elizabeth wanted her words to arrive only when her son and grandson could understand the pressure attached to them. William heard his grandmother speak to his future duty, but triumph never crossed his face. The Prince of Wales, the title held by the monarch's direct heir, looked toward his father instead, as though the message had become dangerous. In the recorded conversation, preserved as a royal audio account, Elizabeth told him that one day he might have to protect the monarchy, even when doing so caused pain inside his own family. Charles lowered his head. William stayed silent. Neither man could pretend those words were ordinary. The next sentence cut deeper. Elizabeth described William not merely as a future king, but as someone who might be required to steady the institution during a period of transition. The crown, in plain terms, meant the monarchy as an enduring institution rather than simply the person wearing it. Charles understood the distinction instantly. His mother was speaking beyond his reign, yet she was also speaking directly into it. Then the private secretary overseeing the playback revealed that the recording was incomplete. A second segment remained sealed, containing Elizabeth's explanation for why she had chosen William for the warning. Charles finally moved. He lifted one hand and ordered the recording stopped. William turned toward him, but the king did not answer. Charles asked everyone else to leave. The door closed behind the last aide. Father and son were left alone with a silent recorder between them. And suddenly the crisis was no longer about succession, duty, or history. It was about a son wondering whether his mother had doubted him, and a grandson realizing that her confidence might become the most painful thing his father had ever heard. For most families, a final message from a mother might bring comfort. Inside this family, it carried the weight of history. Charles had spent his life preparing to succeed Elizabeth. William had spent his life preparing to succeed Charles. Yet with one recorded message, those two journeys suddenly collided. What had once been a clear line of inheritance now felt like something more dangerous. An emotional comparison neither man had requested, but neither could ignore. Charles remained standing after the room emptied, staring at the untouched tea beside him, as though sitting down would somehow make the moment more real. He had waited decades to become king, carrying the strange burden of preparing for a role that could only begin after his mother was gone. That mattered, because Elizabeth had not simply been his parent, she had defined the crown for generations. The crown, in plain language, meant the continuing institution of monarchy and the responsibilities attached to the sovereign. Any suggestion that she had worried about what followed her could therefore strike directly at Charles's deepest insecurity. William stayed seated until his father finally spoke. "Did you know?" Charles asked quietly. The prince answered immediately that he had never known the recording existed, but the king studied him for several long seconds before looking away. William had spent his own life trapped inside another impossible preparation, supporting his father, while knowing he was also being trained for the day he would succeed him. That tension had always existed. Now Elizabeth's voice had dragged it into the open. William admitted that his grandmother's message had not felt like praise. It felt like weight. The prince told Charles that being singled out to protect the monarchy meant nothing if the responsibility itself damaged the man already carrying it. His father listened, but the reassurance could not erase the question behind his silence. Had Elizabeth been preparing William because she trusted him, or because she feared something Charles might fail to control? Catherine later heard that fear directly from her husband during a private conversation. Catherine, Princess of Wales, the wife of the heir and a senior working member of the royal family, remembered something Elizabeth had once told her in confidence about protecting continuity. She had dismissed the phrase at the time as general advice. Now William repeated it back to her, and Catherine immediately understood why the wording unsettled him. Camilla noticed the change in Charles before anyone explained it. Queen Camilla watched him withdraw after the playback, speaking less and avoiding discussion of the recording. She understood that William was not the true threat. The danger was the possibility that Elizabeth had foreseen instability during her son's reign and had quietly prepared his heir for it. William refused to let that possibility grow in silence. He returned to his father and insisted they hear the second segment together. Charles stood beside the table once more, finally reaching for nothing. After a long pause, he gave the only answer that mattered. "We hear all of it." But Elizabeth's reasoning did not begin in her final days. The roots of that message stretched back to one specific moment, when she first feared the monarchy could someday need William sooner than anyone expected. Every extraordinary royal decision has a moment when possibility becomes intent. For Elizabeth, that moment did not come in a hospital room or during a final farewell. It came earlier, during one private family meeting that changed the way she viewed the monarchy's future. Until then, Charles was the unquestioned bridge between her reign and William's. After that evening, however, she began preparing for something more complicated. A future in which the bridge itself might come under unbearable strain. Elizabeth had always treated succession as more than inheritance. Queen Elizabeth II understood that succession, the legal passing of the crown from one monarch to the next, depended not only on who came next, but on whether public confidence survived the journey between generations. As she grew older, William became more involved in private discussions about long-term stability. That mattered because it allowed the Queen to judge how her grandson handled pressure when there was no ceremony to hide behind. Charles felt the meaning of that history almost immediately. The more he heard about those conversations, the more uncomfortable he became. His mother had not merely been preparing William for a distant future. She had been observing how the prince responded when the family itself became difficult to manage. For Charles, that raised a painful possibility. Perhaps Elizabeth had also been measuring the weaknesses he might carry into his own reign. William refused to accept that interpretation. During a private conversation with Catherine, he told her that his grandmother's message could never be allowed to turn him into his father's rival. Catherine listened carefully, because she understood how easily confidence in one generation could be twisted into criticism of another. The prince insisted that whatever Elizabeth had intended, it could not become a weapon against Charles. Then the forgotten Windsor meeting returned to the center of everything. During a private succession discussion following a bitter family dispute, Charles had become frustrated when the conversation turned toward unresolved tensions inside the household. The king, then still heir to the throne, pushed back sharply, ended his part of the discussion, and walked out before the meeting had finished. Elizabeth watched the door close. William remained in his chair. The prince did not criticize his father. Instead, according to a documented private account of the meeting, he looked toward his grandmother and asked one simple question: "How do we finish what still needs doing?" Elizabeth paused before answering. That moment changed the tone of the night. She saw restraint where there could have been anger, and duty where there could have been advantage. Later that evening, Elizabeth asked a trusted aide to arrange a confidential recording session. A confidential recording meant a private audio message preserved for controlled future access, rather than ordinary public release. She explained that some responsibilities could not be reduced to paperwork. Years later, when the date of that Windsor meeting was mentioned during the playback briefing, Charles remembered everything. He remembered leaving, he remembered the anger, and he finally understood that his mother's recording had begun with that exact night. Years later, that single question would return with brutal force, because now Charles and William were about to hear what Elizabeth concluded after that night, and neither man could avoid what came next. The second recording did not create anger immediately, it created silence. Then came the sentence Charles could no longer contain. Facing William without advisors, secretaries, or ceremonial distance between them, the king finally voiced the fear beneath everything they had heard. Had Elizabeth trusted her grandson because she doubted her own son? It was the question the palace machinery could never answer for him, and the one William was least prepared to hear. Charles listened as the recorded message finally explained the difference between succession and stewardship. Succession meant the legal order by which the crown passes from one sovereign to the next, while stewardship meant protecting the institution before that moment ever arrives. Elizabeth's words made one point unmistakable. Charles had always been her rightful successor. William was not being prepared to replace him early. He was being prepared to help steady what came after her. William heard the distinction, but his father was already somewhere deeper. The king had spent a lifetime waiting to inherit a role his mother seemed born to carry. Decades of preparation had trained him for duty, but they had also created a private wound few people could see. The fear that every comparison with Elizabeth would become a judgment. Now that fear had a voice. Charles turned toward his son. Did she think I would fail? William stood immediately. The prince refused the idea with more force than he had shown all night. He told his father that Elizabeth's confidence in one generation did not cancel her trust in another. Charles pushed back. Waiting most of his life for the crown, he said, made it almost impossible to hear his mother prepare William without wondering whether she had seen weakness in him. Then, Elizabeth's recorded voice returned to the very conflict unfolding in the room. In the preserved conversation, she warned William never to confuse preparation with impatience. She instructed him to protect his relationship with his father, even when disagreement became sharp, because ambition inside a royal family could damage the very institution both men were supposed to serve. Charles pushed his chair backward and walked toward the door. William moved after him. The prince asked him not to leave before they heard the rest. Charles stopped with one hand on the handle, breathing through the anger, but he did not open it. After several seconds, the king turned around. Elizabeth's final sentence changed everything. She told William that his greatest test would not be taking the crown. It would be supporting the sovereign before him when the monarchy came under pressure. Charles finally understood. The message was not reducing his authority. It was placing a burden on William to strengthen it. And that realization created a new problem. If Elizabeth had prepared William to become a stabilizing force beside his father, then Charles now had to decide how much influence the prince should actually be given. The father-son rupture had finally been spoken aloud. Now the deeper issue emerged. Elizabeth had not merely left William comforting words. She had left him a responsibility powerful enough to reshape the balance inside the monarchy. A royal message has no power simply because it is emotional. Power comes from what people choose to do after hearing it. And once Charles understood that Elizabeth had charged William with helping preserve stability, the recording became more than a private family relic. It became a test of leadership. Would Charles draw his son closer, acknowledging the role his mother foresaw, or keep him at arm's length to prove that the crown required no guardian except the king himself? Charles knew the answer could change more than one relationship. The recording had given William no constitutional authority, meaning it had not transferred any formal power belonging to the sovereign. But the prince was already the heir, the person first in line to inherit the throne, and that position gave him influence through access, visibility, and future responsibility. If Charles brought him closer now, everyone inside the household would notice. Camilla found him alone after the confrontation. Queen Camilla listened as the king admitted that Elizabeth's faith in William had struck somewhere deeper than pride. She told Charles that confidence in his son did not equal rejection of him. He understood the logic, but emotion was harder to control. What hurt most, he told her, was realizing his mother had feared a future crisis serious enough to prepare for it without ever telling him. Charles carried that thought into the following morning. At a private meeting, the king placed a briefing folder in front of William and kept his hand on it for a moment before pushing it across the table. The folder contained material normally handled through the sovereign's office, the staff structure that supports the monarch in official and strategic duties. The gesture was small. The meaning was enormous. Charles was offering trust where suspicion had existed only hours earlier. William did not accept immediately. The prince told his father that he would not build a separate circle, a rival court, or anything that could make him appear to be governing beside the king rather than supporting him. A royal court, in simple terms, meant the network of advisors, staff, and access surrounding a senior royal. William insisted that every new responsibility had to strengthen Charles, not compete with him. Charles agreed. Then he made another decision. The king ordered that knowledge of Elizabeth's recording be restricted to a tiny group. No wider circulation, no casual discussion, no access beyond those directly involved. William understood why. If the message escaped without context, it could be twisted into a story about succession, weakness, or preference. But secrecy created its own shockwave. Camilla noticed the change first. Senior household figures began realizing that meetings were shifting, access was narrowing, and William was suddenly being drawn closer to the center. The queen consort understood that something had moved inside the monarchy, even if most people still did not know why. And by the end of that day, people who had never heard Elizabeth's voice were already reacting to the power of what she had said. Secrets inside royal households rarely announce themselves. They reveal themselves through changed schedules, closed meetings, altered access, and the expressions of people who suddenly realize they are no longer standing where they stood yesterday. Within hours of Charles's decision to bring William closer, the atmosphere shifts. No public announcement has been made. No official explanation is offered. Yet inside the household, one truth becomes impossible to miss. The recording has changed something between the king and his heir. William began joining select strategic discussions beside his father, and the change was impossible to hide from those who managed the royal household. These discussions mattered because they dealt with sensitive family decisions, public responsibilities, and the long-term direction of the monarchy. The royal household, in simple terms, meant the network of staff and advisors supporting senior members of the family. Most of them still knew nothing about Elizabeth's recording. They only knew the prince suddenly had access he had not possessed before. Camilla felt the shift personally. Queen Camilla approached one meeting she had expected to attend, only to learn that Charles and William had chosen to speak privately first. She did not protest. She simply stopped outside the closed door for several seconds before walking away. The queen consort understood what altered access could mean inside a family where proximity often carried its own message. Charles found her later. The king told Camilla that he was not pushing her aside, and that William was not being elevated against her. He explained that Elizabeth's final message had changed how he understood continuity, the effort to keep the monarchy stable across generations, rather than allowing one reign to stand isolated from the next. Camilla listened, then asked the question neither of them could avoid. "Has everything changed?" Charles answered quietly, "No, but something has." And the secret began to loosen. A staff member learned through a documented internal account that Elizabeth had left a recorded message naming William directly. The details were incomplete, but that made the danger worse. A half-known secret could be turned into anything: a warning against Charles, a hidden succession plan, even proof of a fracture between father and son. Charles could have pulled William back. He could have restored the old distance and hoped the whispers died. Instead, the king did the opposite. He ordered his office to prepare for the possibility that the recording's existence might become public, making clear that his son's new role would not be erased simply because others might misunderstand it. William saw the cost of that decision. The prince realized his father was carrying not only grief, but the burden of defending a relationship now being watched by people who did not know the truth. So he made an unexpected request. William asked Charles to meet him privately, away from advisors, offices, and palace procedure. That answer captured the entire crisis. The monarchy had not changed hands, but the relationship at its center was changing. And William was about to decide whether Elizabeth's message would divide father and son, or finally bring them together. The turning point comes without officials, cameras, or ceremonial language. William does not approach Charles as heir to sovereign. He approaches him as a son. For days, Elizabeth's voice has seemed to stand between them, carrying expectations neither man asked to hear. Now William decides the only way to honor his grandmother is to remove the rivalry her message could accidentally create. What follows is not a constitutional decision. It is something rarer inside royal life. An unguarded conversation. William understood the danger before anyone said it aloud. If Elizabeth's message became public without context, people could frame him as the preferred monarch of the future, rather than the loyal heir of the present. The heir, in plain terms, is the person next in line to inherit the throne. That distinction mattered because his duty was not to compete with Charles. It was to support him until the day succession came naturally. Charles had been carrying a different fear. The prince finally understood that his father was not terrified of losing power tomorrow. He was terrified of how history might remember him. If Elizabeth's trust in William were interpreted as doubt in Charles, then decades of waiting, preparation, and sacrifice could be reduced to one cruel comparison. William spoke first. He told his father that he would never use his grandmother's words to diminish him. His responsibility, he said, began with helping Charles succeed. The king listened without interrupting, and for once the conversation moved beyond titles, offices, and duty. Charles finally admitted what had broken him. Hearing Elizabeth's voice again had pulled him backward. For a few painful minutes, he had not felt like a monarch at all. He had felt like a son still waiting for his mother's approval, even while wearing the crown she had carried for so long. William did not challenge that confession. He simply let his father say it. Then the prince revealed his own fear during that private conversation. Elizabeth's message had frightened him because it did not feel like a reward. It felt like a warning. If his grandmother believed he would one day need to steady the monarchy, then she had also been telling him that his future might demand sacrifice before he was ready. William reached toward the recorder but stopped before switching it on. Charles placed his hand over his son's. "We don't need to hear her again to understand her." William looked at him, and for the first time since the recording surfaced, the tension loosened. "Then we carry it together," Charles said. That sentence changed everything. The king was no longer resisting William's growing role. The prince was no longer afraid that accepting responsibility would look like ambition. Together they agreed that if Elizabeth's message ever reached the public, they would not treat it as a scandal. They would define it as a call for unity between generations. Their private battle was finally over, but the palace had waited too long to contain the secret. And as word of Elizabeth's recording moved beyond royal walls, an intensely personal message was about to become a national story. By morning, what had begun behind a closed palace door belonged to everyone. Britain did not hear the recording itself, but it learned enough to understand its significance. Elizabeth had left William a final message about protecting the future of the monarchy. Immediately, the story divided into competing interpretations. Some saw a warning, others saw reassurance. Yet one image outside Buckingham Palace captured something simpler. The public was responding not to royal politics, but to the memory of a queen speaking beyond death. Charles knew the story could no longer be contained. Major broadcasters led with confirmation that Elizabeth had left a private recording naming William and addressing his future obligations to the crown. The crown, in plain language, meant the monarchy as an institution, rather than simply the person wearing it. That distinction mattered because one careless interpretation could turn a message about continuity into a story about whether the king had ever been fully trusted. Camilla sat with him as the coverage intensified. Queen Camilla watched Charles tense when commentators questioned whether Elizabeth had been preparing William for instability during his father's reign. Advisors suggested a stronger denial, but the king refused. Anger, he understood, would only make the story look more threatening. The queen consort stayed beside him as he chose restraint over wounded pride. William moved quickly for the same reason. The prince approved carefully worded language, stating that his grandmother's message had strengthened his duty to support the reigning sovereign. A reigning sovereign simply meant the monarch currently on the throne. His response was deliberate. William would not allow Elizabeth's confidence in him to become a public weapon against Charles, and he would not let silence create a rivalry they had already rejected in private. Outside Buckingham Palace, the story took on a life of its own. Crowds gathered near the gates, while newspaper front pages carried the words, "Her final words to William." Among the flowers left nearby, one handwritten card carried only 3 words, "Duty passes forward." That small message caught the national mood more clearly than hours of debate. Charles watched the public reaction begin to change. Instead of treating the recording as proof that Elizabeth had doubted him, more people began seeing it as evidence that she had prepared father and son to function as connected generations of the same institution. William had not been chosen over Charles. He had been charged with standing beside him. Then the king watched his son defend that shared duty on television. Charles reached for the remote and switched the screen off. Camilla expected frustration. Instead, he looked toward her and said quietly, "He understood her better than I did that first night." The queen consort said nothing. She did not need to. The country had delivered its interpretation. Now only Charles could decide what Elizabeth's final message would mean inside the family. And his final decision would close the wound the recording had opened. In the end, the recording did not reveal that Elizabeth had chosen William over Charles. It revealed something far more human. A monarch who had spent a lifetime studying duty, understood that no sovereign survives through strength alone. Every reign depends upon the loyalty of those who come next. Charles had first heard his mother's words as a verdict on the son he had been. Eventually, he understood them as a final lesson for the king he had become. Trust your heir before history forces you to. Charles finally understood what the message had always meant. Elizabeth had not created an alternative succession plan, meaning a different route for who should inherit the throne. She had been protecting continuity, the steady passing of responsibility from one generation to the next, without breaking the institution in between. William had not been told to prepare against his father. He had been told to stand beside him until the day his own duty arrived. The king carried that realization into one final private conversation with his son. Charles told William that he was finished measuring his reign against Elizabeth's past, or against the future his son might one day build. For years, comparison had haunted him. Now he chose something harder and healthier: acceptance. His mother had prepared the monarchy beyond herself, just as every sovereign eventually must. William answered without hesitation, The prince told his father that he did not want the crown before its time. He wanted the chance to learn beside Charles while the king was still there to guide him. That mattered because the recording had once threatened to turn inheritance into rivalry. Instead, it had forced both men to say plainly what neither had needed to say before. One was not waiting for the other to disappear. Charles then made the final decision. He ordered Elizabeth's recording returned to the royal archive, the protected collection where important royal records and historical material are preserved. The king did not want the message replayed until its emotional meaning became distorted. Its purpose, he said, had already been fulfilled. Before it was sealed away, Charles listened once more. Elizabeth's voice began. This time, the king did not lower his head. He did not grip the chair. He did not hear accusation in every pause. Charles listened only for a few seconds, then reached forward and switched the recording off himself. William looked toward him. The king rose, and together they left. Elizabeth's final message had not weakened Charles's kingship or elevated William at his expense. It had repaired something neither man realized was vulnerable. The son who feared his mother had doubted him, discovered that her final concern was continuity. The grandson, burdened by her confidence, chose loyalty over ambition. Succession was no longer a shadow between them. It became what Elizabeth had always understood it to be, a promise one generation keeps for the next. There was nothing left to prove. No one walked ahead. No one remained behind. The deepest wound created by Elizabeth's final voice had become the very thing that restored trust between father and son. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.